this is it, you don't even name him. It's embarrassing, isn't it?
I think the issue is I've asked someone who is a high repute.
But we know who it is.
To look at this.
So
that person.
But just in layman's terms, is it someone who worked on this floor, who used the photocopier out there, who leaked the report? You spent $500,000 of taxpayers' money. You've got nowhere. Does that sum it up?
Well, no, it doesn't. Firstly, unlike many inquiries of this regard, we have ended up with a report that has strong suspicions about where this leak came from.
Was it someone who worked on this floor who used the photocopier out there?
As Paula Rebstock's report makes clear, it's someone who worked as a clerical assistant.
Did they work on this floor? Did they work on this floor?
They worked. We only have Patrick. We're not a huge organisation. We only have 2 floors, so this person would have worked on this floor.
Is anyone there?
Did they use a photocopier out on this floor?
I can't say whether they used a. I'm sure they used as part of their work a photocopier. Where that was located, I don't know, Patrick.
So $500,000. You can't even say what photocopier this guy used.
Well, that's actually not been material for Ms. Rebstock. Ms. Rebstock was asked, could she identify where the source of the unauthorised disclosure came from? She did find strong suspicion about where it came from. And I'd have to say when we started this investigation, I didn't, and I don't think any people who were commenting on this matter thought it would come from the ECC. She was able to not only highlight which department it came from, but she was able to identify the likely identity of the staff member who she suspected leaked it. She came to the view that naming that individual in the final report was not appropriate for a couple of reasons. Firstly, she reports a strong suspicion. She was not able to definitively prove that X leaked the report. Given that, she thought it was inappropriate to name that individual, given that there remained a degree of doubt about their identity. Paula Rebstock also took the view that because this person was a relatively junior staff member, that it was not appropriate to name them in this context. But I come back to, this is a report that actually did find with strong grounds where this leak came from. There are relatively few inquiries of this kind that get to that point. So in that sense, I think Ms. Rebstock did make significant progress. Remember also, in context of the time and cost around this, Ms. Rebstock was also asked to look not just at the leak of cabinet papers, but also to look at a series of other unauthorised disclosures that occurred prior to that through the MFAT change process. Again, Ms. Rebstock has been able to identify a significant number of unauthorised disclosures. She has been able to look at the behaviours of a number of individuals, has found some of those behaviours that fell below the standards of behaviour. So in a sense, she's been able to cast a lot more light on this.
And looking at those other leaks, Nigel Fife is still a senior public servant. What action have you taken against him? Have you taken any action against Nigel Fife?
Patrick, I've said very clearly that I have considered whether I name any of the individuals as X, Y, and Z. I've come to, sorry.
You've taken Nigel Fife's the senior role over the Ministry of Justice.
Patrick, listen, please.
I've come to the view that it is not appropriate to name any of the individuals, so I'm not going to get into a debate about who these people might.
But has anybody been?
But what's the point? What's the point of saying that if we all know sitting here that Nigel Fife's sitting in a senior role at the Ministry of Justice? But what's the point of saying that? Because to the taxpayer, it looks like you spent $500,000 a guy photocopied it out here, nothing's happened to him. Nigel Fife is sitting in a senior role over the Ministry of Justice, nothing's happened to him. You spent $500,000 over 2 years, and what's happened?
Well, it's important if you go back to person X, where we had strong suspicion. That person left the Commission very shortly after the events described in Paula Rebstock's report, and they are not employed in the public sector currently.
But it was,
it
was a clerical assistant, so take person X away.
But
just say what have you said personally to Nigel Fife? What have you done anything about?
I'm not going to get into any of the issues about who may or may not be persons X, Y, and Z. And I come back, Patrick, because for a really important reason is what's the point for me about this report, the amount of money, the amount of time. For me, this is not about a witch hunt around individuals, around matters that are, you know, of historical interest, and to be frank, are a historical footnote in the story of the public service. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the issues about the restructuring have been concluded, they've been through that, they've moved on as an organisation. For me, the really important thing is to do two things. One, as I said, to uphold the value and the right way of doing things, which the vast majority of public servants do through restructuring situations that affect them personally. And they need someone to stand up for them and say, yes, what you're doing is right, it's difficult, and is the right thing to do. Equally, they need someone, it's the role of the Commissioner, to call behaviour which doesn't live up to those standards.
But are they being held?
But that's my interest in this, and I think it's actually, if you think about $500,000 around reinforcing and learning from a significant episode when behaviour did not go up to those standards that we expect public servants to live.
But why will people take this as an as some sort of an example if they're not being held accountable? If there's nobody being reprimanded, why will they then not leak in the future?
I think there are a couple of things here, Corin, that speak to that. One is, I think it's very clear the level of the standards that have expected of public servants. I think even though Ms. Rebstock came to the view that she was not naming individuals, the individuals concerned have felt that the partial disclosure of their identity is sufficient issue of them that they have engaged senior counsel for significant amounts of time, that we have been in litigation about the disclosure of identity that Ms. Rebstock is highlighting. So that suggests that from their point as individuals, they are concerned about how far this report goes and the conclusions that Ms. Rebstock goes to.
What actions have you taken with the Y and Z? Have you discussed this with them? Have you just taken any disciplinary action?
Look, Vernon, I'm not trying to be difficult on this one. I have said to the parties that represent X, Y and Z that I am publishing Paula Rebstock's report in its entirety. I have done that. I have said to you today the reasons why I'm not talking publicly about those individuals further, and for that reason I'm not going to talk about what I may or may not have done.
But it wouldn't disclose anything about the individuals to say that you have taken disciplinary action against one or more of them.
Well, firstly, the thing about, you have to recall in any system that if there are people in a public service, it's not the Commissioner who takes disciplinary action about them, it's their own Chief Executive.
Okay, well, rephrase the question then. Have any chief executives taken disciplinary action against any of these parties?
I'm not aware of that as yet.
So given
Wouldn't
that there was,
it be outrageous if that was not the case, given the
You've got to
level of lack of trust that Rebstock has highlighted?
But let's recall, Vernon, that this is a report that has just been concluded. As you'll see, Ms. Rebstock got it to the end of November. So if you think a bit about the question that you asked, you would be very surprised if disciplinary action had been taken.
Yes, what are you saying?
right, so do you expect it to happen in the near future then?
As I say, issues about a disciplinary nature are hypothetical, but I've said very clearly if those issues arose, they would be a matter for the relevant chief executive.
So if
I mean,
they're
you said
working
this
for a
is-
different department,
Sorry?
if they're working for a different department or ministry, I mean, what is the responsibility of that chief executive who now has inherited these people?
Chief executives have responsibilities for all the staff that they have, and they always have to make judgments about the trust and confidence that they have in all the individuals that they employ.
Would
Good
chief
person-
executive
person
routinely
is-
discuss possible disciplinary action with you, though?
There's a variety of things, Vernon. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's very important if you go back to the State Sector Act.
Sorry to interrupt there, but in this case, have they?
I haven't had any conversations as yet, but I come back, Vernon, I don't think you should read anything into that because this is a report that is very, very fresh.
So for instance, does Andrew Bridgman know from you that Nigel Fife is the person in this report? Have you taken that step as State Services Commissioner to talk to Andrew Bridgman and say, hey, Nigel Fife's in the guy on this report?
I go back to what I've said is that publicly I'm not disclosing any issues about I'm not trying to be cute here, Patrick, but I'm not going to get drawn into questions about whether in a public way about whether I have talked or I haven't talked to particular chief executives about particular people.
But it's straightforward, so we'll take the names out of it. Have you just, because at the end of the day, the chief executive of the department doesn't know whether these people are employed from this information you've given out today. So have you gone to the chief executive and said, hey, Y and Z are in your department, do something about it? Or are you just going to leave it in the ether?
No, I'm not leaving this report in the ether, but I'm not going to tell you here today, Patrick, what I may or may not have done.
When you said this is historical,
Yep.
and you don't want to go on a witch hunt, then why were you having a report and spending all this money on it if it's so historical?
Because I think, I think if you look at any of the reports that happen around the public sector, it's a big system, stuff happens. The point of a system that's trying to get better is that it seeks to learn from that experience. And, while unauthorised disclosures are not new in the public sector, I think the nature of the experiences that we saw through the first part of 2012 was of a scale that we've rarely seen, certainly in my professional career. And so for me, it was an important point of learning for the system about what's the right thing to do here. I mean, one of the very interesting things for me is I spent a lot of time talking to public servants, was through that period people were very surprised at what they saw happening, and they were saying, is that the right thing to do as a public servant? And part of my leadership role is to say, what are the standards? And to actually affirm what's the right thing to do. But equally, when we see a set of circumstances, as we did and as outlined in great detail in Ms. Rebstock's report, where the standards aren't upheld, it's equally my role in being very clear with public servants about what's the right way to behave. So for me, that's the real value of a report like this, and the real value of it goes beyond behaving with integrity, protecting information that's given to you in confidence is just so fundamental about our ability to keep operating a professional, impartial public service. So that's a huge asset that we have today, and I think any commissioner who's in this job is going to be very keen that we keep that reputation, because we lose it at our peril.
Great, but if there's been no disciplinary action, isn't that all lip service, really? I mean...
No, the value of these reports, I think, is less around what may or may not happen to particular individuals. It is those key lessons for us as a system.
Given that this is very rare, and particularly it mentions in fact for anything like this to happen and for these kinds of things to be leaked, doesn't this indicate how strong the feeling was about the damage that those proposals was going to do to INFAT's operations? And essentially, I mean, they were effectively dumped, so perhaps these people were right in kicking up such a fuss and doing that.
Well, the issue about this is not about, and this is the important thing, the issue is not about the views that people expressed, or necessarily that they had strong views. You could go around the state sector, and we've seen some very big restructurings, and restructurings that in some senses are much bigger than what was proposed in fact, let alone what happened in reality, about departments like IRD or DOC or Ministry of Justice. And people have commented strongly and have real concerns about the direction implied and what it means for them personally and their families, because it's not a cold, bloodless analytical process, this change management exercises. But they've done so in a way that's allowed those issues to come onto the table, to be considered on their merits, and for improvements to be made in the final decision. The thing that I'm very clear about here is not that I have concerns about people in MFAT who genuinely believe that many of the changes were wrong. That's not my beef. My beef was that a few individuals, and it was relatively few individuals, sought to use the court of public and political opinion to essentially screw the scrum to get the outcome that they wished. And that for me is behaviour that is not acceptable as a public servant, even when you're personally affected.
Tracy, then one more question, we have to go.
Can I just ask, where this was an inquiry set up to look into a leak. What it seems to have turned into instead is it almost like an employment investigation.
Well, I mean, you always look at, you're right about, it started out as an unauthorised disclosure. When we started this, we simply didn't know where it came from. It may not even come from a public servant. It need not have got into a employment arena. But I think the point actually that you're raising, Tracy, is fundamentally I'm not seeing this in an employment lens. As I said, I'm not going to get into whether there are or are not going to be employment consequences out of this. The key thing for me is that we take the learnings about what does it mean to be a professional, impartial public servant.
How can you say there have been learnings when this report, Paula Revstock's report, was leaked to media yesterday? I mean, have you learned any lessons?
What I can say is I have got this report undertaken. I'm very clear about my obligations about talking to the public service about this report and the learnings for us. And actually I think as public servants, people are wanting to see this report and understand what does it mean for them as a public service.
And if there are any further leaks, would you undertake the same exercise, $500,000 spent on a report that essentially just ticks people off and says you should not do this? And you could have done that when the leak happened. You could have sent the same messages you're sending today out without what looks actually a bit like a witch hunt that doesn't have any consequences for the people that have behaved badly.
Well, firstly, I don't set up inquiries lightly, and my track record is I'm pretty sparing around the number that I commission because they do cost public money, and you want to make sure that they are around issues that do matter. For me, much of the commentary about this report that was commissioned was that it wouldn't find anything. I think Ms. Rebstock has done a very thorough job, and she's made a lot of progress around identifying what happened. As I said, some of the individuals who are at least partly identified in the report certainly feel that there's been a degree of scrutiny on their actions with which they are uncomfortable, hence the degree of legal and litigation work that has gone around this review. So in a sense of, I wouldn't see a review like this happening every day. As I said, it's not atypical of large reviews that previous commissioners have undertaken. And as I said, it's certainly not the most expensive review that a commissioner has overseen.
You said that these people have got legal counsel. Is that legal or threat of legal action and expense any reason you're not revealing their identity? Is that play a big part at all?
Not for me, because I come back to Ms. Rebstock wrote this report. She came to a view about the findings, and including the identity of individuals or how they are identified. If Ms. Rebstock had come to a view that she wished to identify people more than she has here, that would have been fine with me.
You said there was still some doubt as to the identity of that person. What is that doubt? I mean, why is that doubt there?
Well, if you read the report, you'll see that Paul Rebstock reports a strong suspicion that X.
But how can you suspect without actually knowing? Like, where is that gap?
Well, there's you need to go into that report. I mean, I think Ms. Rebstock talks about if she wanted to have, if you like, 100% certainty, she would have needed access to particularly forensic information that's simply, not available. We don't run SSC as a prison. We run it as a business, and so some of the forensic information that would have given her that definitive proof was not available. But she still came to the view, and that was, remember, both the High Court and the Court of Appeal also came to the view that she had strong grounds for coming to the conclusions that she did.
So these new chief executives, if they come to you for advice about disciplinary action, you will talk to them about that?
Just look, that's part and parcel of my job with chief executives. As I said in response to Vernon's question, chief executives do deal with a whole raft of disciplinary action through the public service at any one time. Now, they don't come to me on each and every one of those examples, and I wouldn't expect them to, but they do from time to time around situations that have particular complexities or they want to talk through, and that's part of my job, is to engage with them. But I'll make the point, and it's in doing so that helps them come to their own decisions about what they do and don't do in the circumstances.
So you will wait for them to come to you, or because before I'm not really clear what you're saying, that you really couldn't approach them, or how's that going to work?
What I said to you is, for the reasons I've outlined, I'm not prepared in a public forum to talk about what I may or may not have done with chief executives around this matter. And the way I operate with chief executives is a mix of chief executives come to me around stuff, I go to them around stuff. It goes both ways.
Thanks, everyone.